Thom is the founder and the director of the Chicago Community Media Workshop. I always say Chicago Media, but it's the Community Media Workshop. You're based in Chicago. And I did want to ask you today, there is a Chicago Writers Collective or something that's showing up in the New York Times, including an article by Jim Warren. Do you know anything about this group?
The Chicago News Cooperative is a new venture as of last fall that is largely made up of former Tribune editors and reporters trying to adjust in this shifting media landscape to how we deliver online news. And they managed to get some local funding and a contract with the New York Times to produce copy on Chicago on Fridays and Sundays in the New York Times. And this is a kind of hybrid business model to try to continue the tradition of hard-hitting, sometimes investigative reporting, as well as expert commentary. And the biggest thing that journalists are concerned about is many of them get laid off by publishers that don't have enough ad revenue to keep them on board. Is how are we going to pay for the journalism we need as citizens to make good decisions? No one's really quite figured that out yet, but Jim O'Shea, formerly of the Tribune, is leading this effort with the Chicago News Cooperative, and they've been making some waves, although, they were supposed to have an interactive website with a lot of local news coverage already up and running, and they've now postponed that till fall. I think, like many other nonprofits, they're having struggles raising the money they thought they could raise.
Do you know if this outfit, the articles that appear in the New York Times, do they appear in the New York Times nationally? Or when I go online to read the New York Times, do I get just a version that's geared for Chicago? I don't know how they would know I'm in Chicago.
The online edition is, like most of the internet, internationally available, and the Chicago copy is there. The Chicago edition of the New York Times has this copy in it, but they're doing this in a couple of other cities, so indeed it is not readily available in all national editions of the New York Times. I believe they have a California couple of pages now, and they're also talking about doing Florida. The idea is to attract local ad revenue and to have top-notch journalists doing that reporting. I think the Chicago pages, and I know a lot of the people doing the editorial work, is still trying to find its voice. And without getting too technical, who are they really writing for? Are they writing for Chicagoans who happen to get the New York Times? Or are they writing about Chicago to the rest of the world and the vast influential audience the New York Times has? I think they're still trying to figure that part out.
I've read two articles. One was an article on Rogers Park, which I thought really missed the boat, and I don't need to go into details. The other was an article about Jesus Chuy Garcia when he was running for the county board. And I just want to mention to everybody that Jesus Chuy Garcia, a longtime activist, former alderman and state senator, now, is he elected to the county board? Or
he won the primary, and he will run in the fall election, but he's considered to be a pretty sure bet. He ran a joint campaign with Rudy Lozano Jr., and in fact, that joint campaign and the kind of old and new Latino activist angle was unique. And when the New York Times ran that story, no one else locally had really picked up on that particular campaign yet. It got a lot of attention. They both went up against entrenched machine candidates.
Burkites.
And Chuy won, and this upstart young 30-something Rudy Lozano Jr. came within several hundred votes of winning.
Well, Chuy will be a guest on our radio show on I believe it's the 14th of May.
There's some history.
And we're going to have a good time talking to him. And he also is, I'm just going to throw this out, he's been doing a lot of running, and on the 15th, we are also going to have an Athletes United for Peace 5K run. It will be it's free race, but you can donate money to the Iraq veterans against the war. That's coming up on the 15th. Okay, Thom, one of the reasons that I got you here today, not only are you nearby and a good friend and you always have something wonderful to say, but you were someone who was very close to Studs Turkel. You worked with him a lot, and there is a new film coming out. And that film is going to be premiering real soon, HBO film. Why don't you tell us a little bit about it and get us ready for it?
Well, it's amazing, a year and a half after Studs passed away at 96, how much attention his life and his work is still getting. I was part of a BBC interview just a couple of weeks ago as a woman out of California was looking at archives that exist out there of his wonderful radio programs. We, of course, every year honor local Chicago journalists with the Studs Turkel Award, which I now see cropping up after we've done this 15 years on journalist resumes. It's a badge of honor, like an Emmy or something like that. I never expected that when we started the award, which was a fundraiser for the Community Media Workshop. But it was through that process that I got to know Studs pretty well, and indeed, in the last 5 or 6 years of his life, when he was really ailing and pretty much living out of a hospital bed in his front living room, but also publishing 3 more books. I mean, this guy was active and busy and alert and always commenting to the very end. He had kind of moved from being this master interviewer kind of back to his showman roots, and was just this phenomenal storyteller that could make all these different connections over the generations, and from culture and music to politics to sports. The last time I saw him 2 weeks before his death, he was bemoaning the baseball season that once again had not gone well, and yelling at the cable talkers about how they were trashing Barack, who was 2 weeks away from being elected president. So HBO...
Do you know if he got to vote absentee?
Well, there's a very kind of bittersweet story about his absentee ballot arriving the morning that he passed away, wow, which was about a week before the election, and indeed, he never got to cast that ballot for Barack Obama.
We know what side he was on.
Yes, we do, because he was talking about it up until the very end. So HBO had been working for some time, and filmmaker Eric Simonson in particular, and a bunch of other Chicago folks, collected a bunch of interviews. I have not seen it. This Wednesday there'll be a preview at the Gene Siskel Center. I believe there are still a few places left. And you could contact me at the Community Media Workshop on Monday, and we'll see if we can't get you some tickets. But the HBO documentary will first cablecast the middle of the month, celebrating what would have been Studs' 98th birthday. I believe it'll start airing on May 15th and then run several times over the course of the month. I'm fascinated at people's continuing fascination with this master interviewer, book author, showman's life. And I think it's because he was not only unique and different, but the way he gave ordinary people, along with famous folks, a voice. He just had a particular skill at both disarming someone who maybe had never been in front of a microphone before, and then getting them to talk rather intimately about his life. About their lives and the journey that they might be taking at that moment. I remember growing up listening to his program on WFMT weekdays, and one of the more memorable shows that comes to mind as we start talking about Studs is this really famous radio documentary he did of the train. And this was the trainload of people going out to the 1963 March on Washington, during which the very unexpected and now iconic speech, I Have a Dream speech, was delivered by Martin Luther King.
I was there.
So you have this trainload of Chicago civil rights activists who are talking with some nervousness about what they were traveling to D.C. to encounter and to do. And then this totally different flavor as they came back exhausted and inspired by this mass outpouring of humanity to push for civil rights, and this phenomenal, really, series of speeches and music and folk songs that occurred there. But what was unique about Studs is you never heard the Martin Luther King speech in his radio documentary. You didn't hear the other speakers that day. What you heard were the kind of rank and file, on-the-ground organizers who were going out on this train together, and then their reaction as they came back to Chicago. That's what was important to him. Not the famous folks up on the podium who we see in documentary film since that event, but the folks that actually put the event together and organized to get folks to turn out with some pressure and duress, because this was not a for sure nonviolent activity that they were planning because of the reaction that both local police in D.C., local residents in Virginia and Maryland felt about all these civil rights activists descending upon D.C. History, of course, shows that they were on the right side of justice, and a few good things happened in the couple of years after that. But for an interviewer like Studs Turkel, what was important were those regular folks in the rank and file. And I know one reason we decided to have this conversation today is that it's May Day, and this would have been a very special day for Studs every year because of his devotion to working people.